Delegates Lounge. Pull up a chair. I'm Alex Tarquinio, a journalist based at the United Nations here in New York City, and your MC for this podcast, featuring some of the most influential minds in the world today. Settle in for some riveting tete-a-tete, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Almost 20 hours of, sunlight during the day. It makes those berries, especially the wild ones, very, very tasty.
Blood sausage. So we are using the blood and then we make sausages from that. If I'm going to explain how we do that, though I think nobody wants to eat that.
It's one that we call rep, which I would liken to collard greens, kale, chomolia, spinach, and many others. We take pride in drying food when we have it in abundance.
Rabanadas are the proof that nothing goes to waste in Portuguese cuisine, because you can use bread leftovers in this dessert.
Its history is linked to shepherds who spent long hours in the mountains. Legend has it that one of them got tired of the usual bread and cheese.
It's a real favourite, and it's messy, but it's delicious in both summer and the winter.
Prickly pears are everywhere. Another thing that you pick when you're walking as well, as long as you have sunglasses.
Welcome back to our culinary special, Dining with a Dozen Diplomats. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, tune in on our playlist for a smorgasbord of recipes from Australia, Brazil, Cyprus, Czechia, Estonia, Finland, Malta, Portugal, Slovenia, Switzerland, the United States, and Zambia. These recipes were shared, as you've just heard, by a variety of high-level government ministers and ambassadors. Now in part 2, we'll delve deep into the intricacies of diplomatic dining, and we have one more very special recipe to share. But first, a word on gastrodiplomacy, our word of the day. Simply put, this is but one variety of soft power, which refers to the various ways that nations use their cultural influence to strengthen ties with other capitals. In the broadest sense, gastrodiplomacy refers to the visceral persuasion of a national cuisine to improve a nation's standing with foreigners. Diplomats abroad, for example, often exchange foodstuffs representative of their culture with their counterparts from other countries. In the narrowest sense, gastrodiplomacy is the influence a nation's representatives can wield at the dinner table, or, as we'll learn, while chopping onions in a steamy kitchen or carving up a roast lamb. History has been made at the dinner table. Arguably, there's a direct historical thread stretching more than 50 years from U.S. President Richard Nixon eating his dinner with chopsticks at a banquet hosted by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai to geopolitics today. And you don't have to take our word for it. Our show notes include a link to the photo of that bygone Chinese dinner in the U.S. National Archives, along with a link to my foreign policy essay on soft power. President Joe Biden's ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, known affectionately to her team as LTG, has her own spin on gastrodiplomacy. She calls it gumbo diplomacy. Greenfield, who refers to herself as a Louisiana cuisinier, grew up in the Bayou State, where this hearty soup is extremely popular. The United States held the rotating Security Council presidency in December as Greenfield was preparing to end her tenure at the UN. So we're pleased that she took time out of her busy schedule to share her personal gumbo recipe and a few words about the dish. Gumbo preparation takes time, the ambassador told us in a recent email, and over the course of her career she has made a point to invite others into the process, including foreign diplomats, to help chop celery or onions, for example. Working together like this, she says, breaks the ice. It opens doors to sometimes difficult conversations. She often says that gumbo diplomacy, as she calls it, works all the time because it makes people comfortable and helps build relationships. And of course, gumbo makes for a delicious meal, and so she's happy to share her recipe with our listeners. You'll find the ambassador's gumbo recipe on our website, along with many of the recipes in the first part of the Dining with Diplomats culinary special. Her recipe serves 10 to 12, an ideal number for a diplomatic dinner. This gumbo recipe takes 4 hours to prepare, so when she pulls diplomats in the kitchen, they'd better be prepared to clear their calendars for the afternoon. The ingredient list calls for 2 pounds of andouille sausage, a staple of Louisiana cookery, but if you can't find this in your local shops, then you may substitute any smoked sausage. Combine that with 2 pounds of shrimp and 2 pounds of skinless chicken breasts cut up into chunks. The soup is packed with yellow onions, celery, green bell peppers, tomatoes, garlic, okra, Creole seasoning, and Louisiana's very own Tabasco sauce.
She makes gumbo, put hair on your chest. Her Creole crawfish are the best. You'll be hooked on for life if you taste a single spoon. You're gonna need it when you go dancing under that bio moon. 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 You're gonna need it when you go dancing under that bio moon.
From the sultry Louisiana bayou, we're venturing to the craggy shores of Malta, land of medieval knights and Mediterranean cuisine. We recently sat down with the island nation's UN envoy in her office near the United Nations headquarters in New York. Vanessa Fraser is Malta's permanent representative to the United Nations, a title that simply means she is the top diplomat representing her country's permanent mission to the UN. As you'll hear in this episode, the ambassadors acting as their country's UN permanent representative, better known as the PR, change all the time. Typically, they stay about 4 years, but these are political appointments, so they can alter with the government back home. Each year, 5 member states are elected to 2-year terms on the UN Security Council. The 10 elected members, collectively called the E10, serve alongside the 5 permanent Security Council members, better known as the P5. Ambassador Fraser was wrapping up her term as one of the E10 when we spoke, and she met with us between the morning and afternoon Security Council sessions. As you'll hear, this time was usually reserved for working lunches, and it was her only free afternoon in mid-December. Some of her best memories of serving on the council have been the monthly lunches with the Secretary General, often referred to as the SG. Diplomacy is almost as fond of acronyms as the military. In the first part of this special, Ambassador Fraser described her favorite Maltese dishes and the archipelago's wine and spirits, including baitra, a sweet liqueur made from prickly pears. That's one of the gifts that she gives to her counterparts from other countries to represent the best of Malta. Here's the second half of our conversation.
I find this podcast very interesting because actually food is a very important way to break the ice with people. And, there are times when we would be in meetings or even, around the council table where it is very heated and we might be on opposite ends, but we can actually eat together. So that part is key.
Well, there's a whole, conversation around hard power and soft power. We all know what hard power is. But I have written about soft power in other guises. But gastrodiplomacy can be very important to diplomacy itself, which is why I wondered if you knew of any world history that had been made, where they had difficulty agreeing on a treaty. And then I know this has happened. They sit down to a good meal together, and they finally come to an agreement.
Because for example, even when we have ministerial meetings, there's always the dinner.
Absolutely.
Which is not the open session, it is more restricted, and all of us experts are outside and advisors waiting for our ministers or prime ministers to go out and say, we agreed to reach this compromise.
Yeah.
And invariably it is at the dinner of a conference where somehow you find some compromise on something. So I've seen it happen many, many, many times.
Are the ministerial dinners more formal, or, I mean, obviously work gets done.
The work is different when it's around the table. First of all, you're not reading out of a script. There is a dialogue. You explain yourself, you interact, you ask questions, you do back and forth. And manners always prevail, right? So you are going to be less rude. You're not going to write about it. Oh, you're saying rubbish. Out of respect for the host and for the others around the table. So it does make a big difference. You can do a lot.
I imagine it can be kind of startling seeing people who've been, at loggerheads in the consultations, behind closed doors with the Security Council, and then see them over dinner or, breaking bread and sort of laughing
about something. Yeah. We also need to be, it's very important that we're able to distinguish between the personal relationship and the professional relationship also. Because we have, as career diplomats, we have all been in situations where we have maybe had to make a statement that we're not exactly in agreement with, but it's our government positions, right? But you really cannot blame the person that is delivering the message also. So there is, in these dinners, there is the opportunity also to get to know the person and to establish a personal relationship. And then there's a personal relationship which could then change policy because each ambassador, especially here at the UN, these are the highest ranking diplomats of every country. So they have influence over their capitals. So when you have the opportunity to bring your case, at a more informal personal level to an ambassador where maybe countries have been at loggerheads. I mean, they could influence the policy in capitals after having had certain arguments. And also because there's a personal relationship, so it is very important. And I have seen ambassadors change policy. I have influenced decisions taken in my capital also.
Has a good diplomatic dinner ever changed history?
I do think so, very much. Maybe not, a specific dinner, but a series of them for sure. It is so important for us to be able to interact with each other at a personal and human level, not only to be, around the working table, but when you're sharing food and you're talking about, I like this, and this reminds me of a dish that we have at home, or we would never have this, or we would cook it, and we have rabbit, but we would not bake it, but we would fry it, whatever. So, the conversations are different, and you get to know people on a different level, and they've been very important. When you build those personal relationships, then you can really build important bridges. So I think it is very important. I have been a bilateral ambassador all my career, except when I came here to the UN. And it's incredible how many lunches and dinners we have. But it is very important. At the beginning, I had found it very difficult because I would say, you really don't have to feed me if you need to ask me something, But I understand the importance of the interaction. It's a different type of interaction. We really are a family in multilateral diplomacy. And it is important. It's important to learn about other cultures. It opens up avenues for other discussions. And I have been at dinners, and I have gone to dinners with the intention to raise a specific thing when it is in a more casual, friendly and family, especially when you have dinners in residences, not in restaurants. So you're actually in somebody's home. It does make a big difference. It is important in diplomacy, very much.
I always thought it was a great misnomer that you're called a permanent representative. Of course, you represent the permanent mission, but the permanent representatives are anything but. They change all the time.
Yes.
As soon as they've presented their credentials, the other ambassadors will invite them. And are these mostly one-on-one, like you'll invite them back to the residence, or are there grand dinners for them? How does that work?
So new ambassadors do like to do a round, of course. First thing that they would task their PAs to do would be to set up a number of courtesy visits to ambassadors, and then it would depend on what their priorities would be. Normally, you would meet with the dean, who's the oldest ambassadors, maybe your geographic family, the heads of the geographic, and then you would work your way until you try to meet as many as possible individually. But each country would decide which ambassadors to meet first, depending on what their priorities would be.
It sounds almost like ripples in a pool. Like you throw in a stone, and first they meet with their regional colleagues,
and then exactly
similar interests.
But if you're on specific committees or whatever, so it really would depend on the individual country. And then there also is the ambassadors who invite new ambassadors. So we like to do it even. Amongst the EU, we see each other. We have our EU ambassadors meeting every Tuesday. So we immediately meet new ambassadors. But it is nice to welcome from other regional groups. So when there's a new African or Asian ambassador, it's nice to have them meet with some key members of our group, just to help them understand, our position, for us to understand what their priorities will be, how we can collaborate, and to build a friendship.
Well, in fact, and I think people outside of the UN possibly don't understand how regional it is, because you need, as a region, to work out things such as appointments to committees and who will run for this. And everything is sort of apportioned geographically. Those might be the level of things that you might work at a luncheon.
Yeah.
And when you have your counterparts around to your home, I assume you have a special dining area. Do you put out special china? Are there things that represent Malta on the table?
China with our coat of arms on it, and everything, the flatware, the crystal. Normally, we would like to serve Maltese wine also, which is not easy. We don't get it. So, some countries are lucky, Chile or whatever, can buy wine locally. We cannot. We receive shipments from Malta, but we do like to promote Best of Malta. And that is, our food and our wine is part of our culture.
Obviously at the UN, you take a break between 1 and 3. There's pretty much a hard break, at least with the public events. I assume that's because
we go to lunch.
Yeah, many things are worked out over lunch meetings.
Yes, we have so the UN work is from 10 till 1, and then from 3 to 6. Those are the official UN hours. From 1:15 to 2:45 is the lunch hour. It's specific. No lunches start before 1:15 and have to end at 2:45 so that you can go to the 3 o'clock. Right? And there are breakfast meetings also, which are 8:30 to 9:30. Right? So there are actually set times.
There are a lot of rules in diplomacy.
Yeah, thankfully, although I have a dinner this Friday, but normally there are dinners on Fridays. The weekend is really very much for the family, but the rest of the week is all lunches and dinners. And it's... it may seem like there's a lot of gluttony, but it really is. I mean, a lot is done, and it is very, very important. It really is important. I like to host. We host here, depending on the size. We host at the mission. If it's smaller, more intimate, I prefer 12 or even 10 at the residence. I do like to bring ambassadors to my home because I want them to know that they are personal friends, also not just colleagues. The respect is very important that one cultivates. And we are all really one family. And so I believe that hosting at home is, when one can, is much nicer, more personal. And I like to, and also, in the home you have photos of your family, and it feels more personal, so that is nice. And a lot of work is done, because in the UN meetings we read our statement.
You then have to come back to your office and file diplomatic cables back to your capital, isn't that right? Yeah. And that's where you tell them what you learned in the dinner or what changed your mind.
It won't be very long report, but there will be key, there will be 2 or 3 key bits that you would have picked up, which are important, which you might not have heard in a meeting, or you might not know about certain interaction because you could be at a dinner with 10 other people, which might be from different geographic groups, and you don't know that, the Grulak and the Africans are going to have a resolution. Well, you didn't know, but they spoke about it.
And for listeners, Grulak is, and it's a strange acronym, it's the Group of Latin American Caribbean.
And they would learn about something that we may be doing at the EU or WEOG, Western European group, for example, because obviously we are in our families and in our groups, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, the information wouldn't have come out yet, not because it's secret, but because it's not something that has been presented yet. Oh, this would be something I would be able to support, or this is of interest. Normally, around the table, there would be a cross-regional representation. The host normally tries to do that. There's always one or two things you pick up which have to be conveyed.
So gastrodiplomacy is a real thing.
It is a real thing. And the receptions are also important. And there are times I go, someone doesn't want to speak to us directly. I'll be there with my husband. So I know that Sam will go and speak to him so that he will get the message.
Because there are countries that don't talk to each other. They don't have diplomatic.
Yeah, like I could tell my husband, for example, we would never agree to that, but it's important to know, for example. But they would, the country that conveyed the message would know the spouse was the message.
So that's where the diplomatic spouse comes in. For those who do have a spouse who's engaged, it can really be a two-person job.
Normally at the dinners, the spouses aren't invited because it's purely work. So rather, you can have 10 ambassadors if you don't invite the spouse, but you will have 5.
And there are certain things that they may not say in front of the spouses.
So they're just sitting around listening and eating. Normally they're not invited, but at receptions, yes. I have 5 dinners this weekend. There's one where he's invited as spouse.
You have to watch. I remember in one episode of The Diplomat, the show running now on Netflix, her spouse says, this is fiction, of course, but how he would always eat a sandwich before a state dinner. Yes. I guess you have to not eat too much at all these various dinners and lunches that you go to.
Because I always have many, my PA always knows to tell them she will take fruit for dessert. And then I'm always like, can I have the souffle?
But yes, so you do have to pace yourself. You have all these lunches and dinners. You are cycling off. You're completing your 2 years on the council. What would you miss?
And what I would miss would be the monthly lunches with the Secretary General. We have a lunch at the 15 with the Secretary General and the lunch at the E10 with the Secretary General. So 2 Security Council lunches every month with the SG. And that is absolutely the one thing I will miss from my tenure.
Kind of the difference between the mood of the 2 lunches.
There's a great difference. In fact, I said that hit the ground running that I would miss the lunches. But I would, to be honest, I would miss the E10 lunch.
The E10 lunch is probably more frank and open conversation when it's I don't want to say just the E10, but when the P5 is sort of removed and all the drama of the P5. And that does keep with the theme, so that's an excellent place to end. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Rebecca Bryant is Australia's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. She described the challenges of making Australia's iconic dessert pavlova in the first episode. She's a career diplomat who went on to tell us about some of the more informal aspects of diplomatic dining, including a memorable dinner in her apartment in Beijing, where she was both cook and host. I imagine with your years as a diplomat, you must have hosted many a diplomatic dinner. How do you work to blend the cultures and respect each side? And also, how does it function as a part of diplomacy?
I think in general, sharing a meal is always an icebreaker. So here in New York, more than in any other place that I have been posted to, food sharing is a critical part of communication. Most of our meetings, because of the UN schedule, it's 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. The substantive bilateral and plurilateral meetings occur at meal times, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And so, a larger number of working lunches, working dinners than I've ever experienced before. So a lot of work gets done over meals. We like to always welcome newcomers by taking them for lunch or having them for dinner. The ambassador and I here at the Australian Mission, particularly with our Asia Pacific counterparts, we have a an understanding that we will always invite them, to lunch or dinner as soon as we've received their credentials. That's a fantastic way to get to know someone. It allows you to ask them about where they've come from, whether they've been to your country before, have they seen this dish before. All of those things are much easier over food.
No, that's a fascinating insight. So when you get a new counterpart, if there's a new envoy, it's always publicized certainly to the press corps and the UN Journal when they present their credentials to the Secretary General.
As soon as those credentials have been presented, or if there's been any change in the arrangement for senior officers. So if, there's a long period of leave for a permanent representative, there will be a note distributed. So I get advice at the deputy level, we get advice at the PR level. And it's a really great way for us to know movements, and it allows us then to reach out and warmly welcome newcomers.
Is there any advice you'd like to give maybe in terms of diplomatic dining and things that, hosts might learn from this?
Sometimes, there are rules of protocol around dining. There's a lot. We have a training program for our young diplomats, that takes them through the order of precedence for seating, the correct arc of a meal, 15 minutes of mingling, followed by 1 hour and 15 minutes of meal time, the exact timings of entree, main and dessert. You can plan a meal perfectly according to protocol rules, but there's no alternative. There's no replacement for conviviality, for warmth, and you don't always have to be informal to get that warmth. You can have warmth and be formal, but ensuring that your guests are comfortable, that you are accessible to them, that they feel welcome. That's really, really important. It's way more important than timings or that you get it perfectly correct.
A formal dinner, for example, at the ambassador's residence between two or more countries, the servers will know the cues. The principal says the entree course is over. There are cues that are given, and it is somewhat stage managed like a performance. Isn't that right?
That is correct. The thing is, it doesn't always have to be that way. So one of the things that I think is really valuable when you're planning a meal is to think about whether it does need to have all of the protocols observed, whether you do need to have, order of precedence observed in your seating arrangements, or whether you can go entirely the other way. I hosted a lunch recently for a group of colleagues, and I abandoned protocol altogether with their agreement. We did a lottery, so I wanted everyone to sit somewhere different. So as they came into the dining room, they picked a colour out of a hat, and then they went to sit at that seat. It was a colour-coded table. Sometimes games are fun. It removes protocol as a barrier to communication, and it can make people feel, more welcome. It can be a little bit more fun. That's not always appropriate. I totally agree with you, but sometimes it's just good to mix it up.
That's fascinating. I can see the benefits, the advantages and disadvantages of both. If you don't give people forewarning, they may feel they're being disrespected if you don't obey the protocol. But on the other hand, when diplomats who are so used to protocol get taken out of that could be like the rules are there. They're sort of made to be broken.
I think it's important that you just don't do it the same way every time, right? Because otherwise, gosh, I eat so many lunches and dinners, and if every one of them was exactly the same, that would get a bit dull. I mean, the key to any meal with friends or professional colleagues is, making them feel comfortable. If I'm a host, that's my first priority. So if someone comes to my house and alcohol is culturally inappropriate for them, I'm not going to not serve alcohol, but I'm going to communicate actively with them so that their expectations are well managed, and I'm going to ensure that there are sufficient delicious choices available. I want everybody to feel like they can be themselves. I want them to feel comfortable and to have choices available that suit them. So I think, particularly in the UN environment where we are such a large melting pot, there's so much consideration given to how people live, how they, what their faith is, what their cultural norms are, and there's a lot of respect that everybody does it in a different way. So making sure people are comfortable, that is the key to a fantastic dinner for everyone. Food, drink, all of that's important, and ensuring that people are comfortable, that's the key.
When you were doing any of this diplomatic dining over the years, did you have any near misses? Like you mentioned, for example, lamingtons, at least the story goes, may have been created because a chef was kind of caught out and got late notice. Did you have something where an ingredient didn't arrive on time? Or can you think of anything where you had to improvise for a dinner?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was living in China, I used to have people to my home. I didn't live in the ambassador's residence. I had an apartment in Beijing. But I find it's a really nice way to get to know your colleagues better if you have them to your home and you cook rather than have a chef cook or going to a restaurant. It's just that much more intimate. And the quintessential Australian casual meal for me would be roast lamb with roast vegetables. Difficult to do in lots of places because lamb isn't easily available in a lot of places. The lamb turned out okay. It took me a long time to find it. But, delicious slow roasted potatoes, beautiful. But the pavlova just did not set properly. So what I ended up serving them was, a broken pavlova just piled with cream and fruit, which was very tasty, but not quite what I was going for.
Were they familiar with pavlova? Because if they weren't familiar, I'm sure it was still tasty.
There's another dessert in the UK called Eton mess.
Eton as in the school or eat? Yeah. No, Eton as a school, E-T-O-N, and mess?
Kind of like a failed pavlova. So it's when the pavlova kind of breaks into pieces and it's all put together with the cream and some jelly and some fruit, and they call it Eton mess.
It's funny you should talk about making lamb in Beijing, because lamb I know is a very typical main dish in Australia and tasty. But not actually throughout Asia.
Increasingly people are moving to plant-based diets. So when you're entertaining, it can be quite challenging to prepare and plan a meal based on a meat dish. So, again, if you're offering a roast, you do have to offer a plant-based
an alternative. Absolutely. It must be difficult too if you are the diplomat having another diplomat over. And you're also cooking. I mean, well, that any home cook would know when they're preparing for a holiday meal or they have maybe their husband's boss is coming over or something. The stress of both having to be the chef and have the winning personality once you get to dinner.
So it does. You're absolutely right. It does influence your choices. So the thing about a roast, most of the work is done, you bring it to the table. I think the important thing is to incorporate the service into the meal itself. Either you make it fully casual and, you put the dishes on the table and everyone can help themselves, or you bring it out and there's some theatre around the carving of the roast or whatever it is. Some people enjoy plated meals, so guests are seated and you bring out a meal fully plated. That for me isn't possible when I'm doing it myself. I kind of like the act of sharing, all the forks in, the spoons into the dishes. I think that creates an intimacy and a casualness that, can be really nice.
Cecilia Kanyangwa Milambo is the spouse of the permanent representative of Zambia to the United Nations, Dr. Chola Milambo. She is the president of both the United Nations Delegation Spouses Club and the United Nations African Ambassadors Spouses Group. She described Zambia's cuisine in the first part. Here, she takes us through all of the stages of preparing and hosting a diplomatic dinner at the ambassador's residence. The diplomatic spouse has a very important role to play. And can you describe that for our listeners?
Sure. So I believe the spouses are a very key factor in diplomacy. We bridge the gap through our social ties, through networking, through working together, through doing charity events, visiting each other, and we get to learn and respect each other's backgrounds and cultures. I'm in charge of the residence, so to say.
Well, it's like very similar to the official duties of a first lady. I guess you have to plan to be a diplomat's or ambassador's wife. You have to plan social occasions, perhaps help plan the menu of if you're having an important ambassador over.
Yes.
And there must be some difficult considerations because you both want to show off your culture to the guest and also respect their culture and find a happy meeting ground. So how does that go into the planning? Okay,
so for my husband and I, this is our first diplomatic posting. He's an economist. He was with the World Bank and later IMF in Washington, D.C. And I'm a banker by profession. And with banking, you have to do a lot of networking. And then while he was at the World Bank, would have some delegates that would come for annual meetings and spring meetings. And I'm so glad we did that because that was the beginning of our training. So fast forward, when I was coming into this role, I was taken to the Zambia Diplomatic School. It's called ZIDIS.
And you learn about the various aspects of the roles, such as planning the diplomatic meals. And there's a lot that's very formal, the order of precedence. Do you learn all of that at school?
Yes, so ZIDIS was very helpful. I sat with these remarkable ladies who have served overseas and now are back helping new diplomats get into the role. One trick they told me, which I was getting to, Alex, was that when you get to New York, because what we're telling you here is theory, but when you do get to New York, try and visit your fellow spouses. So that was my first inkling. I asked my neighboring country, Zambia is landlocked. We're surrounded by 8 neighbors. So I reached out to each one of them if I could go for a courtesy call. A courtesy call is 30 minutes to an hour. And when I visited, I would see how they welcomed me, how they spoke, how they served their tea. And I was picking lessons from that. Even if we had already entertained in DC, American entertainment sometimes is casual.
Yes, it's much more casual than diplomatic dining or even the way that you present a cup of tea in a mission here at the UN is quite different than it would be done in a business environment or in New York or Washington.
Absolutely. So that helped me a lot from the neighbors, and I started doing regions. And I haven't finished visiting all the 193 residences in New York.
Do you have a goal to do that before the end of your term, to visit all 193?
It's a must to at least meet them. Mm-hmm. And being president of these 2 groups has helped me. Where I cannot go to their residence, I'm able to meet them. We can have a coffee, we can talk. And, that way you keep learning from others. So when it comes to entertaining at home, usually the office will let me know, or my husband would tell me we have so-and-so coming to the residence. Okay, and I'll ask the date, I'll ask who exactly is coming because of all the protocols, all the rankings, because even when we sit them at the table, there's a ranking that has to follow in terms of seniority, if it's an ambassador that has been in New York for a long time, or if it's a certain rank from home, if it's the military team coming, who sits where, who sits at the head of the table, who sits in the middle, and all that placement. So I will ask for those details, and every step of the way, I'm in touch with the office just so we're on the same page. Because, sometimes we wives can get a little excited and want to do things the way I want. Right. But I always have to follow with the guidance of the office.
So there's a certain order of precedence for the diplomatic corps. Obviously, if you have a minister, that's clear, yes. Coming. And also the military, and the military would be by rank. Although there's almost a counterpart in diplomacy to rank. Yes. And then in terms of the service during dinner, does the chef and their staff, do they take the clues, I guess, from your husband? Because there must be during the dinner service, it's also probably an order of precedence and the flow of the meal. How does that work?
Yes. So when we host at home and we need a service, the office staff will come to help with the dinner service. And they already know the protocol, so it's easier. So you discuss, before the dinner, who's going to do what, who in particular is going to serve who. Because sometimes in those protocols, you find only one person can serve the most senior person at the table.
Is it based on the rank?
For example, we had our vice president, and she had one person who was on her team to serve her, and the rest of us were served by the people from the office. So it's such protocols that I have to make sure I abide by, even if I live in this residence, I still have to respect, because when you have a senior person such as the Honorable Vice President, you have to follow the protocols. And at times it could be fellow ambassadors who go by who has served longest in New York. And that's the one who take the head of the other side of the table, and then we'll seat them according to seniority. So the preparations pretty much are discussing the menu with the office. If I know what the people who are coming like, it's very easy. That's what will be on the menu. But if I don't know, I try to infuse a variety so that there's something for everyone.
And is there a blend of your native customary food, or do you try and infuse some of your traditional cooking, or perhaps the traditional cooking of your guests?
So if it's our nationals coming, definitely our food will be on the menu. Yeah. But if it's a variety of people, I've seen that the tradition in New York is usually sea bass. Yes. So once the menu is discussed and agreed, an officer from the office will go either with me, or if they chose a caterer, they will go together to buy the food to ensure we buy the freshest and, the most good looking food out there. And then all this is done the day before. And then on the day itself, we just do the final touches. And for me, I will make sure a few days prior, we take out the china. Even if it's clean, we have to clean it again. Ensure there's enough china, flatware, and glassware. We have what we call the coat of arms. There's a male and a female standing, of course, representing the family. There's a cob of maize. Remember, I talked about our staple food. There's the eagle which shows the ability of rising above our problems. There are these wavy lines representing the same colors that you'd find in our flag, but also the waviness represents the Victoria Falls. When it's an official dinner, that's the china we will use. Your symbolism in your china, you show the strength of your country. It's also homage. I mean, we're all here because of our country. So we take pride in putting that on the table and have the menu on the table so that everybody knows what they're going to eat. So the food tasting, I prefer to do that because sometimes the palate of somebody might find it a bit strange to test food from Zambia.
Oh, and you don't want it to be, for example, too spicy if it's not a dinner where there are only other Zambians there. Now, I would guess that the chef tastes the food, because you also want to make sure that it's safe. So you want the chef to, I know you select nothing but the freshest fruits and vegetables and meats, but does the chef taste it first and then you taste it for the flavor? How does the tasting work?
The chef has to bring the food not less than 2 hours before.
So she or he will taste it, the chef?
She will, and we'll look at her for 30 minutes straight to make sure she didn't do anything there.
Right. No, so she is like they used to in medieval times have the royal food taster. So the chef has always fulfilled that role. So she'll taste it first, and maybe half an hour or so you'll come in and say, how is it? And then you'll have a little taste. And partly there, you're looking to make sure it's not too spicy for your guests if they're not all Zambian.
Make sure the salt is right, with all these dietary issues. Make sure the food is fresh.
Now, if this is done 2 hours before, I guess you just then reheat it Well, that way you know it's also done on time. I imagine the timing is very important.
Yes, we'll bring out our chefing dishes and put all this food and, start slow heating. And at least 30 minutes before we sit down to eat. So you put some warm water in a second dish, put it there and put a burner underneath. And that does a good job. It doesn't distort the taste of the food. It just heats it.
Now, it sounds like it's also safer to have the food, well, for multiple reasons, to have it ready a couple hours before. But have you ever had any near misses, something you were almost pulling your hair out because something didn't quite work out for a diplomatic dinner?
Thank God, no. Alex, I'm hands-on. Even when I know that there's help, even when I know that officers will come from his office, I do understand that these are hardworking people. I mean, I can start the cooking on time. I don't mind doing 3-4 dishes before they arrive. We're all trying to entertain here. We're all trying to create a good name for our country.
And I should point out, obviously, there are some ambassadors who do not have a spouse or partner, and I would assume that in those missions, they assign that role to a member of staff.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. You can speak officially as a diplomatic spouse because you are president of the United Nations Delegates Spouses Club.
Oh, yes, we do a lot. We do a lot of charity work. There's a major event that we hold in every summer, and we identify 4 to 5 countries that would benefit from those proceeds. For instance, this year, among them, we donated to the soldiers of Ukraine for their rehabilitation. Another country benefited was Sudan, and then also Doctors Without Borders.
Obviously, there are women permanent representatives at the UN. And do you have men in your group of diplomatic spouses? Are they a member of your group? And are they as interested in performing some of these duties, making sure the diplomatic dinners come off on time and to a level of perfection?
Yeah, so we do have male spouses, and they too are in charge of supporting their PRs in their homes or residences for dinners. I've been to several where there's a male spouse, and the dinners have been exceptional.
And that's it from the Delegates Lounge. We'd like to thank our esteemed guests who've graciously allowed us to share their hard-earned insights into what really matters. And then there's you, our listeners, who we hope are sufficiently edified to clamour for more of the same. Do drop in for a weekly episode on Thursday or from time to time if we're on the road for special events, in which case there'll be a bonus episode. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like what you've heard, please take a moment to rate or review the show, as it helps others who share your abiding interest in world affairs to find their way to the Delegates Lounge. You can connect with us on many popular social media platforms or reach out to us directly at info@delegатeslounge.com. We're a small team, so we can't respond to every message, but we will read them. Our show this week was written and produced by the host and by yours truly, executive producer Frank Radford. Until next time, keep calm and curious.